So good to have you join us today. Hello and welcome to the program. I'm Lee Jae-yoon in Seoul. Coming up on today's edition of Business Daily. Korea's central bank raises interest rates for the first time in more than 6 years, highlighting the country's solid economic recovery. Industrial output in the country slipped in October from a month earlier, ending its 3-month rise, weighed by a slump in the automobile industry. These stories and more coming right up. The Bank of Korea has raised its benchmark interest rate for the first time in nearly 6.5 years, ending its wait-and-see approach to determine if the local economy could withstand the move. But there are concerns that the higher interest rate could worsen the country's massive household debt problem. Our Kim Ji-yeon starts us off.
The Bank of Korea raised the benchmark interest rate by 0.25 percentage point to 1.5%, the first rate hike in 6 years and 5 months. It puts an end to the record low key rate of 1.25% that the BOK has been maintaining since June last year. The bank's rate hike decision comes despite heightened geopolitical tensions stemming from North Korea's recent missile tests earlier this week. The decision to raise rates is mainly attributed to the fast recovery pace of the South Korean economy and takes into account various external factors, including mounting expectations that the U.S. Federal Reserve will raise rates again in December.
With signs that the recovery momentum is set to continue, keeping the rate steady yet again would have led to an imbalance due to the effects of further monetary easing.
South Korea's GDP growth in the third quarter of this year grew at the fast pace of 1.4% on booming exports, and consumer sentiment reached its highest level in almost 7 years in November as relations between South Korea and China improved. Despite the optimism projected by Korea's central bank, local experts raised concerns that the rate hike would increase the burden of the $1.3 trillion household debt, since it would severely affect homeowners' ability to repay their debts and raise the risk of people defaulting on their housing loans.
Despite the series of government measures that were unveiled earlier this year, the increase in Korea's household debt is showing no signs of waning. A rate hike could put a strain to those who have to pay more in interest payments, which means less spending power and thus prolonging sluggish domestic consumption.
The experts said the focus now is on how fast the BOK will raise rates again next year, which is expected to depend on the recovery pace of the local economy, housing market trends, and further rate hikes from the U.S. Federal Reserve. The BOK governor says the central bank will closely monitor the country's housing market, but says it expects the Korean economy to grow at around 3% next year on expectations that semiconductor exports will continue to rise. Kim Ji-yeon, Business Daily.
And to tell us more about the latest interest rate hike, Professor Kim Se-won from Ewha Women's University joins us in the studio today. Hello, Professor.
Pleasure to be here.
All right, so it was the first hike in 6 years and 5 months since June of 2011. So what has led the Bank of Korea to finally pull the trigger?
Bank of Korea's understanding on economy became pretty positive from early summer of this year. They see that if we take a look at the GDPs and its components figures in the third quarter, they're all pointing that Korean economy is recovering quickly. GDP itself increased over 3.6% on annual basis, and consumption by 2%, investment over 16%, and above all, export increased over 7%. So Bank of Korea believes that Korean economy is expected to stay on the path of recovery for the next year. So that's why they decide to increase the interest rate.
Now, but there had been some variables like North Korea's latest missile test, as well as the recent appreciation of the won, which we thought could possibly hamper the BOK's decision to raise rates, but that didn't seem to be the case.
Right. Regarding North Korea's missile test, global financial market is learning that North Korean missile test and nuclear bomb test is not actually hurting a global economy and Korean economy together. And also, higher interest rate of the Bank of Korea will increase the value of the Korean won, and that does have negative impact on export of the nation. But Bank of Korea sees that the Korean export is so strong, the uptrend of the Korean export is not decreased thanks to higher interest rate. So that is mainly because of the very strong global economic recovery.
Now, of course, the Fed's December FOMC meeting is coming up, and there are expectations that the U.S. Fed may raise rates again in December. What's your outlook on that?
According to recent survey over global financial market expert, over 90% of the experts are expecting that U.S. Fed is increasing interest rate by 0.25% in December. And previously, U.S. Fed Chairwoman Janet Yellen and members of governors hinted many times that there will be interest hikes in the middle of December. And also, the President Trump's U.S. Fed Chairman nominee, Mr. Powell, is supporting raising interest rates. So big question right now in the financial market is not the increase of the U.S. Fed interest rate in the middle of December, but how many times there will be increasing in the next year.
In 2018.
Exactly.
Now that the rate has been raised, how does the Korean government plan to curb the massive household debt, as well as what are some of the other variables that we should keep a close eye on before the BOK's next monetary policy meeting in January?
Well, the largest concern of the Korean government is the huge size of household debt, over 1,400 trillion won. So that's the most important reason why Bank of Korea this time increased the rate by 0.25%. On the other side, the Korean government will be providing more restrictive guidelines on the loans, which is a new DTI, debt to income ratio, from the next year. But if interest rate increases and that appreciates Korean won, and then if Korean export is decreasing larger than expected, the Bank of Korea will reconsider the raising interest rate further in the next year.
So with today's rate hike, can we say that the Bank of Korea has started its monetary tightening cycle?
That's true. This is the official end of the low interest era, I think, which has been started from 2008's global economic crisis. In retrospect, 2008's Bank of Korea's key interest rate was 5%. That has been decreased down to 1.25% until last year, which is the lowest interest level in the Korean history. But Bank of Korea sees that these interest rate should be supported more recovery of the global economy and so on. And in addition, today's decision was not unanimous decision between the members of monetary policy. There was a minor opinion not to increase the interest rate. So that means next year's Bank of Korea's interest rate increase speed will be very slow.
Okay, so we'll keep our eyes on what path the BOK decides to take and also the U.S. Fed.
Exactly.
Right? Okay, thank you so much for coming in today.
Thank you.
Korea's industrial output in October recorded its biggest drop in 21 months, ending 3 months of production gains. Retail sales and corporate investment were also down in October compared to the previous month. Our Kim Mo-kyun has more.
For the month of October, industrial output in Korea dropped by a staggering 1.5% on month, the biggest drop recorded since January 2016. When compared to a year earlier, production dropped by 5.9%. Statistics Korea says the figure was largely affected by the auto sector, which was hit hard by sluggish exports as vehicle production tumbled 11.3% on month. But it added that the downward trend is likely to be a brief adjustment from a base effect last month, adding that figures will likely go back up next month. Production in the mining, manufacturing, gas, and electricity industries edged down 1.1% on month, while production in the service sector was down 1.7%. Corporate investment was also poor in October, as investment for machinery and transportation equipment plunged 14.4% from a 5.3% on-month rise in the previous month. Retail sales, which is linked to consumption, also dipped 2.9% on month, as many people made purchases ahead of the long Chuseok holiday that began in early October. Kim Mo-kyun, Business Daily.
The 10th meeting of the KoreaUS FTA Advisory Committee was held today, focusing on the agriculture and livestock industries. It was held by the Ministry of Trade, Industry, and Energy, where the government said it's aiming to minimize the damage of U.S. import regulations on Korean firms. Deputy Trade Minister Kang Sung-cheon promised to reflect the opinions of all stakeholders involved to ensure none of them are neglected. Committee Chairman An Se-young called on the need to bolster communications so that revision talks do not create unnecessary social conflicts. Other advisory members said active countermeasures against import regulations must be devised through public and private cooperation. Amid the thawing relations between Seoul and Beijing, China's unofficial travel ban on group tours to Korea is gradually being lifted. However, many restrictions still remain in place, especially on businesses run by Lotte Group. China has been playing hardball with the conglomerate after it agreed to provide land for the U.S. THAAD anti-missile defense system. Our Yoo Jun-hee reports.
Earlier this week, China's tourism authorities began allowing travel agencies based in Beijing and Shandong to resume the sale of group tour packages to Korea. Many business owners here in Korea, for whom Chinese tourists provide their main source of revenues, see it as a very positive sign.
Although the lifting of the ban was only limited to Beijing and Shandong province, we are welcoming the move as we thought China's THAAD retaliations would last much longer.
However, the Korean duty-free and hotel industries have been left underwhelmed as China's restrictions on chartered flights and large cruise ships remain in place. Securing more seats and more means of transportation is seen to be essential in ferrying Chinese group tourists into and around the country. Beijing's retaliatory measures targeting Lotte Group and its affiliates in particular are also going strong. Chinese authorities have reportedly told travel agencies not to include shopping and accommodations provided by the Korean conglomerate.
We are only seeing this as a half measure due to the restrictions that are still in place for Lotte Group, which provided the land for Korea's THAAD deployment.
Many industry officials share the view that China's partial lifting of its travel ban will only have a limited effect on Korea's tourism industry. However, hopes are still high that further easing could take place ahead of a key summit meeting between Korea and China scheduled in December. Yoo Jun-hee, Business Daily.
The Bank of Korea's interest rate hike only had a limited impact on the country's equity markets today, with the decision having been long anticipated by investors. At the closing bell, the benchmark Kospi ended below the 2,500 mark for the first time in about a month, shedding 1.45% to close at 2,476.37. The tech-heavy Kosdaq also dropped 1.32% at 771.42. On the foreign exchange counter, the Korean won weakened, trading at 1088.21 against a greenback. The Kospi was weighed by heavy selling from offshore investors, especially in the IT and electronics sectors. Overall, foreigners dumped $543.8 million worth of net shares on the main bourse. Large caps lost significant ground today, with market kingpin Samsung Electronics falling 3.42%, while SK Hynix ended 6.8% lower. After surpassing the $10,000 mark on Tuesday evening in the U.S., Bitcoin touched another record high on Wednesday, topping the $11,000 milestone. But the rally was short-lived as it plunged roughly 18% from its latest record high in less than 24 hours, according to CoinDesk. Trading was extremely volatile as exchanges struggled to keep up with surging demand, resulting in service interruptions for some customers. Meanwhile, U.S. exchange operator NASDAQ is reportedly launching Bitcoin futures starting next year, according to an anonymous source familiar with the matter. This is just the latest sign that the cryptocurrency is moving away from the periphery of finance and into the mainstream. Home ownership here in Korea looks to be shifting off balance. Fresh data shows the number of multiple homeowners rose last year, while those who owned just a single property took a step back. Our Eunice Kim tells us more.
The number of households who were not property owners last year came to 44.5%. That means on average, close to 1 in 2 families in Korea do not own their own home. Then what about those that do? An annual report penned by Statistics Korea on home ownership in 2016 said the number of families owning a single property edged down 1.5% on year to some 7.8 million. Meanwhile, those with at least 2 homes to their name rose by the same percentage to nearly 2.9 million households, meaning some 168,000 families crossed into that threshold last year. Assuming the notion that it's easier to purchase a home when you're already a property owner, well, these numbers back it up. Of those 2.9 million, 44,000 households own 10 or more properties. An elite 3,000 of them were holding onto 51 or more properties. With the top 20% effectively possessing more than half of the country's homes, this shows an extending gap between the house wealthy and the house poor. And those homes owned by the house wealthy are unsurprisingly concentrated in the lucrative Gangnam area. The most, 36%, were in Gangnam-gu district, followed by neighboring Seocho-gu district. Coming in at number 8 was Songpa-gu district, also in the capital city of Seoul. The skewed real estate ownership is viewed as having worsened under the previous administration and its low-interest policy and deregulation drive, intended to drive up investments. As the incumbent Moon Jae-in administration has begun to tighten loan and tax rules to discourage speculative real estate purchases and eventually ease price hikes, some are cautiously optimistic that home ownership could be distributed more evenly in the future. Eunice Kim, Business Daily.
A revision to Korea's Anti-Graft Law, also known as the Kim Young-nan Act, has been scheduled for another review next month. The country's Anti-Corruption and Civil Rights Commission is set to re-evaluate the proposal on December 11th. This after it had voted against raising the value limit for gifts on Monday from 50,000 won to 100,000 won if it includes agricultural livestock or fishery products, citing insufficient evidence for any urgent need. The government is working on a revised proposal, according to Prime Minister Lee Nak-yeon, who hopes to see a revision in place before the Lunar New Year holiday, a busy gifting season. It was not, however, immediately clear whether the anti-corruption watchdog would be evaluating the same proposal or one that has been resubmitted. Korea's major mobile carriers are now offering big discounts on monthly service fees with the purchase of a new phone. In the face of this competition, budget service providers are struggling to survive, with customers leaving left and right. Here's our Elliot Kim with more.
These low-cost phone service providers use what are called MVNO agreements. MVNO standing for Mobile Virtual Network Operators, which are deals in which carriers rent their networks to a client service and customers then sign up with the client service providers. The hope was that good low-cost alternatives would induce healthy market competition. But here at a Korea post office where services are sold, what was once a crowded waiting area is now virtually empty.
There were long waits due to the introduction of an unprecedented zero-rate plan which many people came to join. Nowadays, there aren't as many as before, but there are still older customers who prefer it.
Following a change in September where the 3 major mobile carriers in Korea decided to increase monthly service discounts to 25% when purchasing a mobile phone, 300 MVNO subscribers moved. But last month, that number increased more than 5-fold to 1,600. Despite having nearly 7.5 million subscribers, or 12% of the total mobile communications market, MVNO service providers have consistently operated in the red. Cumulative losses from 2012 to 2016 have been tallied at roughly $275 million. Experts point out the importance of encouraging diversity in the mobile market, but with MVNO carriers struggling with issues ranging from limited store accessibility to not offering the latest phones, we could see more services close up shop, such as retailer Home Plus's Plus Mobile, which is shutting down at the end of this month. Elliot Kim, Business Daily.
Korea was once the world's leading provider of large display panels, holding on to that title for 31 consecutive quarters. But when it appeared that no other country could challenge for the throne, China recently overtook Korea to take the top spot. Amid stiffening competition and the dawn of the fourth industrial revolution, what can Korea do to become an innovative player in the display industry? Take a look.
colorful lights to embroider the exterior walls of the building. Colorful media arts such as paintings, artwork, and more are unfolding. It's an ordinary window during the day, but it transforms into a spectacular monitor at night. The exterior wall of the building is built with a transparent LED display, enabling various media to be implemented without additional structures.
In the case of a typical electronic signboard, the backside is blocked and you feel limited. However, with this, you see through it and it feels more free. Also, it has high definition, so it's very good.
Now, the display market is not only limited to competition in high definition. The rate of technological innovation is speeding up due to the emergence of OLED, which has a response rate that is 1,000 times faster than LCD. Not only can it make diverse shapes such as circles, clouds, or even trees, these displays can be wrapped around and even be worn, as new technology for displays are constantly being tested. Displays are one of the key components of the fourth industrial revolution. For instance, it's impossible to commercialize a foldable smartphone without bending it several times. Hence, display technology with high strength and stability is required. The global display market, which is currently worth $127.4 billion, is expected to grow to $148.7 billion by 2022. After surpassing Japan in the LCD market in 2004, Korea is now the world's top exporter of displays. However, due to the saturation of the existing market and the heavy pursuit by a latecomer in China, now a new leap is urgently in need. A display manufacturing company located in Pyeongtaek. Here, the world's first transparent LED display for construction was manufactured. By drawing circuit diagrams on conductive glass, transparent displays were created without the need for copper wires and modules.
Traditional LED displays must be attached to the outer walls of the building, which makes it less aesthetically appealing while making people indoors feel claustrophobic. However, G-Smart's smart glass is completely transparent and able to create 100% full-color displays.
The content is reproduced through ICT parts embedded in the glass frame, so the screen works in real time. With this, the entire building can serve as a monitor. As such, when glass window of a car or a building is replaced with this display, a higher added value can be created, and at the same time, new demand can be created as well.
Architecture actually can become a completely new media market. There's just so many things you can do on your buildings. For example, you can watch a show on your building now. You can watch World Cup football on your building. You can play games with your building. You can dance together with building. There's, it will change, blow away the current architecture that as we know of. This is completely a new world.
In order to develop new technologies for displays, it's important to develop materials and equipment accordingly. The Korean government is setting up an environment in which the display industry can work closely together. In 2008, Pyeongtaek, Gyeonggi-do Province was designated as a Pan-Yellow Sea Free Economic Zone. It built the optimal industrial infrastructure by attracting global companies leading the Korean display industry, such as LG Electronics and Samsung Electronics, which are close to the Seoul metropolitan area.
The Yellow Sea Free Economic Zone is an economic free zone in the metropolitan area and in a business environment where the cluster industry is developed along with large corporations such as Samsung Electronics and Hyundai and Kia Motors. Gyeonggi-do Province is pushing for it, especially the Pyeongtaek Dangjin port as its main port, so it will become a major economic free zone in the metropolitan area, which will pave an easier path to China or Southeast Asia.
Also, at a favorable location, the Pyeongtaek port is also a distribution outpost for China and Southeast Asia.
With the Pyeongtaek port as the gateway, it has the most manufacturing, logistics, and industrial complexes in the metropolitan area in China. The fact that these companies can export overseas with cheap distribution cost will be the advantage of the Pyeongtaek port.
Korea, a powerhouse in the display market. Based on accumulated knowledge and technology, followed by continuous investment and added infrastructure, we look forward to becoming a dominant leader in the future display market.
And that wraps it up for today. Thanks for watching. We'll be back tomorrow with more at the same time, same place for your Business Daily. Until then, goodbye.